Dan, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Hey, everyone.
So I connected with Dan Blank years ago now because I don't know how I came across your work, Dan, but I'm real glad I did. And I was just immediately struck by how just down to earth Dan was in his approach, very practical. And I remember he wrote years ago something about you don't sell to a community, you serve a community, something like this. And I remember I read it and I was like, yes, that's what I'm saying. That's exactly it. Um, so I just found a very similar ethos. And I think it was last year, we, Dan posted something, I sent him something, he said, we should talk. So we did a little interview and to get a conversation together about marketing, and found we're very much on the same page. And then the reason for this one is I was reached out to by somebody I deeply respect who's releasing a new book. Now, he's had books published with bigger publishers, but they don't want his new stuff. And so he's suddenly found himself in the self-publishing game, and just wondering, what to do and how to do it. And so my intention today is to just hear from Dan, his experience around this whole how what is the terrain of being an author these days? What does marketing look like for authors? What's the short game? What's the long game? So Dan, maybe we'll just start with this. Maybe if you could just tell people a bit about what you do these days and what got you into this line of work.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I live in New Jersey. I work out of a private studio. My family lives a mile that way. And all I do full time is work with writers and creators. I've done this full time for 11 years. So it's a total joy because people who are writing or creating, they're doing it because they choose to and because they're really passionate. And it's a mind-blowing thing for me to work with people who are fully present in what they're doing. When before that, I worked in corporate, I worked in Manhattan, I worked with a bunch of startups and publishing, and I loved all those jobs and all those people, but there's a real difference between someone who has a job you're working next to or with, and someone who is like fully in it. So it's a real joy for me to be able to do this. So I work primarily with writers. Usually I'm helping them one-on-one, and I'm helping them get, creative clarity, what they want to work on, really sorting through that, which is a whole process, figuring out who their ideal audience is, figure out how to share that work in a way that feels meaningful to them, launch their books or their work, and a lot of times too, align it to a business plan or a sense of goals of what they want to do, which I'm sure we'll talk about in some way or another. I got into this because I was the art kid. So I was the kid who went to art school at age 5. I was the kid who was always drawing in class. When I was a teenager in my 20s, I had a fanzine and a radio show, and all my friends were all the weirdo art kids who were in plays or photographers or dancers. My wife is an amazing artist. And I originally wanted to go into publishing right out of college, but they wouldn't hire me. Not that I tried that hard, but I went on all the interviews to Random House and you couldn't get that entry level job. So I got into the .com 1.0, into marketing that way. I got into a trade publisher for a long time. And that coincided with blogging and social media and the internet. And I kind of became the person in the company that helped them launch their blog strategy, their social media strategy, across like 40 or 50 magazine brands, 300 or so journalists. And that was amazing. And that led to this. And this whole thing started with me sending out a newsletter within my company. And that just kind of grew and grew and grew as my voice grew. And so, a little over a decade ago, I started this full time. And that's the story.
Amazing. Well, yeah, where to start on this one? Maybe we could start sort of at the end and work backwards, because you spoke about business model, which actually feels like a very important thing. I see a lot of people, they come up with a part of a business, but they don't consider the long game in it, how it connects to everything else. So they'll, oh, I've got a workshop, and they do the workshop. It's like, but did you have anything to offer after the workshop? Yeah, and often there isn't. Or yeah, I'll give a talk, or I'll I don't know, whatever it is. I do massage, and it's like, but there's no thoughtfulness around what would make their business actually sustainable long term. And um, as you know, every author figures out, there's just almost no money in just selling books directly. You know, there's just the margins are so small unless you're selling a lot of books. I was talking with an author I really love, Derek Jensen, and he's written, I don't know, 20, 25 books at this point. And he said it took him about 20 years. Now the income from the book sustains him, but it took him about 25 years to get to this point. So I'm just curious because I know, I work with a lot of life coaches, healer, permaculture types, and there's a fairly consistent, familiar business model, which would be you do an intro workshop. From that, you get them into a group program or one-on-one coaching. There's kind of the bronze, silver, gold. You can sell them into the DIY thing at the bronze level, group thing at the silver level, one-on-one coaching at the gold level. It's a fairly standard thing. And I'm curious, what does this look like for a creator or an author? Because I'll admit, when I think about authors, I think, yeah, you write a book and then another book. So what are the other possibilities for authors in terms of a business model beyond just writing books?
I mean, this is the difficult question. I think this is the most challenging question for most authors, because a lot of times they come in with and I say this in a positive way, that childlike appreciation for publishing a book. I wrote this book from my heart. I just want it to be read. I just want the book to move. And you're like, all right, that's awesome. I love that. We're going to take that and set that aside for a moment, though, because they haven't really unpacked, what kind of lifestyle do they want? What are their goals? What does that mean? And you have to be honest sometimes, too, about their ambition. Do they have specific goals around book sales or kinds of experiences you want? Because, like you all meet people who are like, their whole thing, they want to go town to town and bookstore and have event after event. And they love that. They are fueled by having 10 to 25 people in a room. They come together, they sell 20 to 50 books, they do it again. And that just lights them up. And I'll be on a call with the person after that who's like, selling 50 books for all that work? No, thank you. So it depends a lot on the idea of what does success look like and where they want to go. And there's obviously the biggest range possible here. There's a lot of authors who just say, I don't want to market the book. I want someone else to do that for me. And the problem with that is we're ignoring the whole business model. We're ignoring the idea of like the publisher is filled with people who love books, but there's a business model in there. It's not just this blind thing where they are going to buy the book and they're going to do something with it. So we have to think about, what do you want to do with it? Do you really want it to be read? Do you really want to move units? Do you have consulting on the back end? Are you writing a genre and you want it, or poetry or anything, and you want a series? Do you want to be seen as a thought leader who's being interviewed? Do you want to be speaking places? Do you want to have a little community where you feel validated and they're chatting about your stuff? I was writing about recently a newsletter about all these people on TikTok and YouTube and Patreon. And I was watching a really great interview with a very successful creator who amassed 1 million followers in a year. And she's ridiculously smart. She's like 20 or 22 years old, marketing background. And I mean, she's just highest level of like figuring out marketing. But it was great though, too, because what she wants is just to have a community. So she's like, I'm in there 12 hours a day, going through my comments to get rid of the bad comments and creating conversation I want. And it's taken 6 months, but now I have good conversations there.
Oh.
She had a lot to say about her business goals, which were interesting. But it's that idea of, I think it forces a lot of people to have a hard question about, it's not just about the product, it's about the experiences that you want, who you hope to reach, and then where this fits into either your identity or some kind of, and I like to use the word sustainable around the revenue, that sustainability. Because I talk to plenty of people who have books and they don't really need revenue from it, but they don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want the book to come out and have no one review it, be on no podcast, no one's talking about it. And then we have to figure out what's the thing between them feeling embarrassed and how much work they want to do. And of course, unpacking that is the idea of like, what are you about? What do you want to be known for? Who will this book resonate with? What do you want to be doing? And then all the different tactics there. So it feels like almost a lame answer, because the answer is the idea of there's so many different kinds of authors and books. It's the gamut from the poet who says, no, I'm putting it out there. It does what it does, versus someone who's got, nope, I've got 12 more books going in my romance series, or a nonfiction author who's also saying, no, I want to be a spokesperson on podcasts. I want to do consulting. I'm going to do some client work for this nonprofit, where it's like, oh, this is like a multifaceted business model.
Wow, that's great. Right. And I suppose if you were the poet, you could also teach workshops on poetry, potentially. You could be hosting retreats on that. You could have an online course or online community for other poets. You could, yeah, I suppose there are probably a lot of other things. I'd be curious.
Well, that's the first challenge, though. I've been thinking about this a lot, because I had a really bad back issue last week, which is totally resolved now. But as part of researching what's going on with my back, you're realizing, oh, you're sleeping wrong. You're sleeping, for me, I'm sleeping on my side. And there's all kinds of conjecture. If you want to waste 900 hours, watch YouTube videos about sleep, and you will hear everything. But, it comes down to, if you want your back to get healthy, sleep on your back. And I'm like, well, I'm 48 years old, always slept on my side. I can't sleep on my back. Until you have a crippling pain and you say, I'm going to see if I can sleep on my back. And of course, the last 4 nights I've slept on my back, no problem. It's like, it's just that getting that motivation, or challenging yourself enough to say, a week ago, I would have bet money I could not fall asleep for an entire night on my back. I would have bet you good money on that. But then I was motivated and, and now that's who I am. I'm a back sleeper.
Yeah. Well, it's, I'd be curious in the chat, maybe people have followed other authors and seen things that other authors do. So maybe in the chat, if you've seen an author, maybe their name, if you recall it, and just what did they do as part of their business model? They were primarily a writer, that was primarily their thing, but maybe they had some other facet to it that made it more sustainable long term. So if you have anything in the chat, I'd love to see the ideas you have. What do you see, Dan, as I'm curious, the biggest mistakes and blunders that authors make right out of the gate? I mean, I imagine one of the blunders is they don't think about the kind of larger ecosystem of their life and where this book fits into it. But beyond that, where do you see that they make mistakes? The ones especially who want to really get out there, they really want to sell a lot of books.
The first one is starting too late, and they can do that sometimes for very logical reasons. I'm going to hold it back, and then 4 months for a launch, I'm going to open it up. My website's going to launch, and it's going to, they want this splash. And I don't begrudge that. I mean, there's a whole reason of that, but I feel that then they hold everything back and they're hoping that the splash will somehow catch fire. And of course, 900 times out of 10, it doesn't. So it's the idea of starting early. So if you're starting a year or 2 or 3 ahead of time and you're thinking, so you're willing to communicate with people. Because you're not communicating, you're not developing your voice, you're not understanding your audience, and you're not testing different ideas about what works or who do I want to reach out to, that sort of thing. The other thing I think is they don't really visualize the book launch and the 6 months to a year after the book launch. This is something I do a lot with people, of thinking your book comes out. Let's really visualize it's 2 weeks after launch now. Who do you want to be talking to? What do you want to be talking about? Who do you really hope reads this book? What kinds of ways do you hope it helps their life? Where would you love to be speaking? If it's a podcast, like what kinds of podcasts? What would you hope they'd be asking you about? Where would you want to show up? It's a lot of these basic marketing questions, but I like visualizing it in a reality. One way I'll often do that is I'll ask people, like, let's just say a famous person, Oprah, it doesn't matter who, finds your book and they say, oh my gosh, Dan, I loved your book. I'm going to bankroll a weekend retreat for you. Here we go. We've got this whole island for you. We're going to bring 100 people. You can invite anyone as a speaker you want. You've got 3 days. Just send my people your agenda. We'll make it happen. And it's that idea of, like, with a retreat for me, it's the idea of, like, oh, well, what would I call it?
Yeah. It's going through your phone?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, shit.
Sorry. Continue, Dan.
Okay. Who would be in the audience? Who would guest speakers be? Like, who are my dream guest speakers? How would we start the day? Would I start with a Q&A? Would I do a speech? Would we have an outdoor event? Would we do yoga? What's the narrative arc of the weekend? What do people want to walk away with? And that's something that you can think about then for a book launch, because it's not just about putting a thing out in the world. Like, it's not just that. It's the idea of, I want to have conversations. I want to meet with people. And if you think about it ahead of time, you're thinking about the people you really want to meet. And if they're people you really want to meet, then suddenly marketing is not this arduous work that you hate. It's something leading you to people that you want to meet, which is different than how most of us live. Most of us live with family that we were born into or married into or whatever it into. We have coworkers, we have a community, and maybe we don't have 1,000 people who love what we love. And the book is an opportunity to think about that. So it's starting too late, not visualizing the launch well enough, not understanding who you want to communicate to. And then I always ask people, like, what's after that? So it's a year after book launch. What then? Not because I want to dismiss that in the same way that when you're at a wedding, no one wants to hear when you're having kids, because it's sort of like, can we just focus on the wedding? Can we just focus on this moment, please? But it's that idea of, this can lead you somewhere. You have this excuse to reach out to people and communicate. Where will it lead you so that a year after you're not depressed? So that, oh, you spent 5 years writing this thing. It went out there, probably sold less copies than you wanted to, probably didn't go as viral as you hoped, but it did something. Where can it lead you to? So you have like another step to go from there. And I think that's just like a mental health thing I think a lot about.
Wow. Thank you. Yeah. The giving enough time. It's interesting. I just did a presentation with a colleague of mine, Bradley Morris, who helps people create these mighty networks, these online communities. And that was one of our big things, was just, you have to give yourself more time. If you're going to launch something, you have to be, I was saying, 6 months in advance at least, but yeah, hopefully a year or so. So this is interesting, because you're saying like 2-3 years in advance. And I can imagine a lot of people think, like, what the hell would I be doing 2 or 3 years in advance of a book? I don't even have a book at that point. How can I be thinking about marketing something that doesn't exist? Could you give some examples of, there's a couple thoughts. Yeah, but what might be elements of such a lead up? It seems connected to this question about the weekend retreat on the island.
Yeah, it's a great question. So part of the reason of planning ahead is that most people panic at the idea of marketing or sharing for a lot of deep personal social reasons. So if you work out this stuff in advance, then there's never that point where you have to start marketing. You have people that you know how to do this. So some of it is the idea of figuring out, what are you about? So you've got a book, and maybe it's a novel, maybe it's a memoir, maybe it's poetry, maybe it's nonfiction. So we know what the book is about, but let's open that up. If when someone reads this novel, and again, we go to real world example, the book does well, you're at the Barnes and Noble on 14th Street in Manhattan, you give your talk, there's a line of 300 people waiting to talk to you. What do they say? What do they want to say to you? What are those little conversations like? Wow. So you start thinking about that, which is, well, what are people coming back to you with? Because it's not just, oh, I read his book, it was so inspiring. It sparks something in people. So you can think about, well, what might that be? If it's a memoir, it could be this theme and that theme and this story. Obviously, it's different examples. So it's the idea of, what is your voice? Because you're figuring out for that book, but then you're thinking, well, what am I about in general? So usually I'll spend time with people working out what I call like their key messages. So it's this idea of, what am I about with the book? And then what am I about in themes related to it? But then what am I about in general? And that could be for the book series or anything I write or anything I talk about. It could even be very, very personal things. So for me, I help writers with marketing. If you want to like dumb down what I do to the smallest level, that would be the 3 words: help writers market. But also, like, I was the art kid. I love creativity. I love independence. I love that you can self-publish a book is like oh, it's so mind blowing to me. It's so amazing because you can do that from anywhere. You don't have to sign your life away to a big company. You don't have to vie for attention. You can do that. You have that opportunity. So creativity becomes one of those key messages that I can kind of lean into. And then I can think about what does that look like? And I can create a background that I hope evokes creativity. So you can do that and you're figuring out your voice, and figuring out your voice takes a lot of time. Like think of like how you dress and just style yourself. You've probably spent a lifetime figuring that out, and you're probably locked into a few different things. Mm-hmm. So now if we're like, I'm going to get online, and it's like, I'm going to do that right before a book launch, I'm going to figure out how I want to be. It's like, that's terrifying. Why don't you spend time figuring out your voice? So you can do that as an exercise, but then you should have an email newsletter. You should figure out one social platform that you want to be a part of. And if you're against social media, which is fine, then figure out the alternative. Say, I'm not going to do social media, but I'm going to do these salons. I'm going to go town to town in my county, or I'm going to do a Mighty Network, or I'm going to do Zoom chats, or I'm going to go through yoga studios. I'm not going to do Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. I don't believe in them. But instead, I'm going to figure out my voice by doing these little talks, or I'm going to leave little notes and rocks in town or whatever. I mean, you could go so old school with this kind of stuff. So it's that developing your voice, and you have to put yourself out there before you think you need to develop that, because you don't know what's going to resonate. I've sent out a weekly email newsletter every week for 15 years. Right. To this day, I still have no idea which newsletters will resonate and which won't. And what's always surprising is that there are ones I'll work on for weeks. I'm doing a book marketing case study. And it's like, oh, this is what people want from me. I spend weeks researching this and writing it. It's 2,500 words, data no one else has. Kind of falls flat. Then one week I'll be panicked and I'll write about like a vintage 2 radio. I've got one up here. I'll be like, this is so dumb, but I'm going to try to relate vintage 2 radios to being a writer. I'll put it out really quick, and I'll just get email after email after email. Dan, this is the best thing you've ever written. And it's like, you never know in some ways unless you keep sharing and keep figuring out what your voice is. The other thing is going out and meeting the people that you think your audience is. So there's a lot of back end work of who are your ideal readers? And I've got a whole process to kind of map that out. But then it's the idea of like, let's figure out where they are. We can do this research a year ahead of your launch. Oh, man. What podcasts are they listening to? Let's literally open up a spreadsheet. Let's start. I mean, do this with clients all the time. Let's get a list of 60 podcasts, because right there, now we've got to ask a bunch of questions. There's like the dead center ones, book podcasts. Then there's like maybe topical. Oh, if it's a nonfiction book. Oh, I wrote a parenting book. But then it's like, well, some of what you talk about, it's about, leadership podcasts might like that. And then there's a lot of mental health podcasts. Yeah, there's a couple of chapters in there. And then this is really niche, but it's people who deal with trauma, because you have that one chapter that's like dead center with that. Then there's personal story. Like I've been in a bunch of I'm not a parenting guy, but I run my own little company and I have kids. So I've been on a couple parenting podcasts. And you never would have thought that. Like, I'm not a parenting guru, but people came to me saying, Dan, you've got this business. We've even got little kids. We'd love to talk to you about how you manage that. And I'm like, okay, like I'll tell you my story. And you start brainstorming that. And what you can do is even start reaching out to these people, not to pitch yourself if you feel it's too early, but hey, Bob, I know your podcast is so amazing. I just discovered it. I just listened to 20 episodes. Thank you for making my life better. Hope you have a great day. Just send out one of those a day. You are going to increase your network. You're going to get like inroads, and you're going to understand the podcast market. And depending on what you do, you can do that with nonprofits, with TikTokers, with like anything. And this is work you can easily do a year or two ahead. And it helps you figure out all the marketing stuff. It actually builds your network. You're actually putting something out there. And in that process, you're going from, I hope my book finds people, to knowing this is what resonates when I say things. Here are the channels I'm using. These are the people I know. And this is what I found resonates with other people. And suddenly you have like just an amazing array of options on which to put marketing on top of.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very important to think laterally about where we could go, what the hubs are. I remember talking with a friend who does crowdfunding, and he had a similar thing. He said, if you're doing a documentary about fracking, well, yeah, there's the anti-fracking groups, that's the bullseye. But then there are environmental groups, water rights groups, indigenous rights groups. There might be outdoorsy groups that want to preserve nature, and there might be I don't know, Marxist groups that see how the poor people are getting screwed. But like, there's just a lot of things that are one ring out, two rings out, three rings out, but that still could work really well, and that you might also be surprised. But it's funny. I say to clients sometimes, they'll say, "I have no idea where to find my clients. I don't even know where to begin looking." And we do an exercise like this, and at the end, they're like, "There's too many places to find clients," and it's like, "You got to bitch about something, huh?" Yeah, so it's not hard, to come up with 100 hubs. I would call them. That's not actually that difficult if you know who you're trying to reach. If you're trying to reach everybody, then it's impossible. But so now, when you said this weekend on an island, I just love this idea of a visualization. So you have somebody design what would be this weekend workshop retreat. What would be all the experiences, and then so are you saying then some where you would use that basic flow, you would take that basic schedule and the vibe of it and translate that into the overall launch of the book?
Yeah, there's a lot you can do because some of that is if you're a new unknown author, it can be helpful if you say, "Oh, my speakers would be, Brene Brown and Liz Gilbert," and right away, even just saying, "Well, people don't know that your book is like that. Why don't, if you're on Instagram, why don't you be tweeting about them?" Not because you think Brene is ever going to see your tweet, but because now people who know you or know Brene might see, "Oh, wow, like Dan's always talked about Brene and he's got the bookshelf and it's all these books that I like." So now you're like, if you like them, you might like me, or I like these things. So you're linking those things together, which is communicating what is that brand about. It is that thing which so many people have this, which is they're repellent to the idea that they can give advice. And it's really a shame, I find, because oftentimes you don't have to be a guru. You don't have to pretend that you are the resource. But if you're telling a story, maybe whether it's a blog or a newsletter or a video or in a book, you can probably say at the end, if someone is going through this for the first time, this is what I wish I knew back then, or here's 3 things I wish I would have done 10 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And it forces you to think about, and again, when you go into a retreat kind of idea, you think about that more often because you can imagine 12 people sitting around you.
Mm.
And you can really visualize, well, what brought this woman here? Her name is Linda. What brought Linda here? What was the challenge for her? What is she afraid of right now? Because we all get in a big room with people we don't know. We could be afraid. What does she hope she gets out of this $3,800 weekend? What's one thing that would just validate her in a way she hasn't been validated in a long time? It just brings it down to that level of like, oh, I would like to validate her. I'd like for her to feel seen. I'd like for her to not feel scared. And that then suddenly it's not, I don't want to be that person on Instagram pretending I'm whatever. It's like, I'm just trying to help Linda out.
Mm.
So that can really become the basis for your entire content strategy for newsletters and videos and whatever you want to do, because you're thinking of it in that way. You're unpacking that weekend to become the entire content strategy.
That's great. Wow, that's just a very practical way to go about it. And it's interesting. I often talk about the can't remember where I got this, the 3 C's of social media. Basically, you can either create, curate, or conversate. So you can a lot of people get stuck, and I imagine as authors would get stuck with like, well, I have to create all the memes myself, or I have to write all the content and do all the videos. But as Dan is saying, you can also curate, and the stuff you curate creates a kind of mosaic effect where people say, "Oh, I get the gestalt of this, I get the vibe, I get the if he's posting about this and this and this and this, I have a sense." Even if you didn't put up any of your own content, just from curating, people can see what you're about. I actually had some colleagues offer to co-author a book with me, literally just based on what I posted on Facebook. They saw that I posted all this social justice, green business stuff when I was in San Francisco. We literally never met in person. They're like, "Would you like to co-author this book with us?" It never happened, but they said it was based on what I posted on Facebook. I mean, they knew I also was a marketing coach, but
yeah,
And then, the conversate, you can start conversations, just ask questions that are really of interest to you. And you can get really rich conversations. And in fact, those are the things I post on social media that get the most traction. I just call it question for the house. Okay, question for the house. Often people come to me because they know I can do this. It's like, oh, I'm struggling with this health condition, or do you know anyone who does this thing? And I'll post, and hundreds sometimes of comments on it. So, a way you can use your platform that's useful for other people and yourself. But also, if you're writing a book and you're stuck on something, you can ask and get a lot of feedback.
It's also too, I mean, I think a lot of people want engagement, but they forget to ask for engagement. And this is why, I spend a ridiculous amount of time watching YouTube, increasingly TikTok. And what I love is that when you see these creators who are building these really powerful things, they're really learning that you have to ask. So my wife has a degree in toy design. I was a toy collector for a long time. So I watch a lot of Lego videos, and you watch these people saying, hey, today we're going to review the new Lego set, whatever. And they're doing this whole 20-minute long video. The Lego community on YouTube is huge, by the way. And you'll just see throughout the video, anytime they're like, oh, they did her arms in pink. What do you say in the comments below? Do you think they should have done the dark pink or the light pink? Because I don't know. I'm in the dark pink camp. And you'll see that throughout the video, they're saying in the comments below, or let us know, or every point that they can get a moment of engagement, they're asking for it. Now, they're doing it for a very savvy reason, which is you get in the YouTube algorithm when YouTube sees a variety of forms of engagement. So it's not when they see a view, it's when they see a view and a comment and a like and a share and all that kind of stuff. So they're doing that usually for a very savvy reason. The more comments they get, it's not just, hey, look how awesome I am. It's, this gets me in the algorithm. But again, if they just do a video and never ask a question, what are people left to comment? Great video, or your video is horrible. It's but when you ask these questions, you're starting conversations, and you have to ask for that. It's you can't walk into a party hoping for magic to happen and just stand in the corner, clutching your drink, and then just hoping that somehow these amazing people find you and say, tell me your story.
Right.
That's my party going strategy, by the way, is the standing in the corner.
Oh, man, that was a lot of my life. Yeah. Okay. Oh man. So I'm curious, what would you say if somebody came to you and they said, well, okay, it's me, I'm coming to you. What is the short game or what's the long game in marketing? If somebody came to you and said, in the next 3 months, want to sell as many books as I can, what's the strategy for that? And then what's the sort of, I guess in some ways we've already talked about the longer term strategy, but if there's anything else you would add, how would you distinguish between this short game and the long game? And we'll start there.
I mean, so much what I think of, and I look at all the younger creators for this, is are you willing to do what it takes? Because if you say, I want to move as many books as I can in 3 months, it's okay, cool. We are going to analyze who has your audience, who has access to your audience. We're going to look at the top 10 other authors. We're going to look at every podcast in this topic, and we're going to make a really compelling pitch so you want to be interviewed on the podcast. So let's work on the pitch letter. We're going to make an amazing pitch letter. We're going to go through those podcasts, every podcast, and say, what does this podcaster love talking about? What does their audience want? What comes up again and again? What does she personally love? We're going to make sure that's in that newsletter. And we're going to make sure that she knows you're going to come with a great story, great advice, that you're one of her people. You're going to have pitch letters for all those people. And that's work. With the other authors, we can think about a lot of different things. We want to get in front of their audience, but of course we want to be generous. We want to be helpful. And same with the podcaster. It's not just that you're tricking them. You're going to give them hopefully the best content that they've ever wanted on their podcast. So for the other authors, it's what can I do with them? Could we do a series of webinars where I'm co-hosting with them? Or I can think about it this way, which is what would she want? What does she love talking about? Because if I can pitch this idea and it's going to be me and her featured, what can we do together? Or even just doing the flat out thing, if that's too much, of just saying, I'm going to email her, I'm going to tell her, you inspired me to write this book. This is what I like about your platform. Here's my book. If you ever wanted to support a creator like me who's just coming up, if you could let your people know, you could do this or that, or whatever, just putting it out there. So there's that kind of specific about who has your audience, thinking about how you can get in front of their people in a compelling and meaningful way, and then making the ask. And then it's the idea of like, where do bulk sales come from? Are there places that you could go where they're going to buy 30 copies of a book, where it's an event where there could be 30 copies moving, or you can encourage your people, like an easy example is a parenting book. It's like, is it a parenting group on Facebook? Is it a PTA? Is it some kind of whatever group? How do we get into a scenario where it's not just selling a book to one person, but, wouldn't your whatever group like this as well? Or why don't you buy 5 copies for your group? That sort of thing. Because in a 3-month time period, it's a really quick period of time. So a lot of this is down to thinking really clearly about what's going to move a copy very quickly. And the ask always has to be not big in a really scary way, but you're going to have to make the ask, and that's what I think a lot of people are hesitant to do that. The other thing is to think about, if you think of the target audience, what can you put out there that is so generous and so compelling that you just feel like, someone's going to share this. So again, the idea of, instead of doing a paid course, what if you do a 10-part series that, it's like, I've got this book coming out, I'm parenting, whatever. I'm doing the biggest problem parents come to with is this or that. I'm doing a free 5-part thing, or I'm going to do this, whatever it is, where now you're just getting out there because it's so generous and it's hitting right into that one pain point. So if it's something about babies, it's always sleep. It's always like a sleep thing. It's like, it can't just be, we're going to talk about sleep and this and that. It's like, no, like, how do you go overboard with it? How do you give something so generous? Can you bring in a doctor too? Like, can you, even if you're like, well, I'm not the expert, like, how do you even amp it up even more? So it's something that people just can't ignore because it's so generous. You can use all the regular marketing stuff. It's limited time. There's exclusivity to it. You think about the platforms that are easy for people, whatever that is, but you really think about, what's my mission and what can draw as many people to this as possible in a short period of time. And then on top of that, you can think about, where does the book marketing come within that? Is it, you're just promoting the book throughout? Or are you giving a special offer? What is that? It's just the initial couple ways I think about that 3-month challenge.
Thank you, Dan. That's very generous of you. Those are great examples. Yeah, the bulk sales, that does seem to be one of the most critical, the critical pieces. Okay, well, I think the other people may have some questions here. Let me just scroll through these comments. We've got some examples shared. And by the way, Dan, while I'm looking through this, maybe if you could just tell everyone your website, what kind of, anything you'd like them to know about your business, what you have coming up, what it's like to work with you, what packages or levels and all that you have.
Yeah, so everything for me is at wegrowmedia.com. Right on the homepage is my weekly newsletter. I send that every Friday. It's an original essay I write that week. I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Dan Blank. I share stuff every single day on these topics. Podcast called The Creative Shift, where I interview writers and creators. That has, of course, been a guest. New season for that is coming up, launching soon. I've been interviewing and preparing for that for a while, so I'm very excited about that. I have a book called Be the Gateway. It's somewhere behind me, blurry in the background, which is all about kind of marketing for authors 101. There's a whole philosophy I have about how to think about putting yourself out there and your creative work out there. And yeah, I do one-on-one consulting with writers. There's a whole page on my website. If you go up to work with me, it'll tell you all about that. If you're interested, you'd reach out. I have a PDF I'd send you that has even more information, and we can kind of see if there's something to do with that.
Amazing. Thank you. Okay, well, we have a question here from Tim. He said, I'm considering taking my online program transcripts and creating ebooks or Kindle or whatever. Suggestions, warnings, ideas?
Yeah, so the great part of that, I guess, is this idea that you're creating a library of resources, of books, essentially. So the benefit of that, obviously, is that if you have 10 books on a topic, they start cross-promoting each other. You start becoming, I'm the author of 10 books covering every aspect of this topic. And then there's a lot you can do with kind of packaging those together. I've got a special sale, get all 10 of them for a certain price. And I often find too that when you do that, it might even open things up more. This is something I've always been fascinated about, is the more I cover a topic, the more you kind of zoom in. And like, as you kind of tune that microscope in, you realize how many more parts to the thing there are. And you start realizing I can have a book on this aspect and that aspect and that aspect of it, which I find fascinating. So that's the good part. The downside is obviously if you spend a lot of time formatting it and getting covers designed and launching them, do you have a plan of how you would, what are your expectations with that? Or are you just spending another year putting all this in different format, but it won't sell any more than it did in the previous format? Sometimes that's okay if you just want to be seen as a writer. Right now they exist as an old course. I wanted them on Amazon. I want it to be author. And then once I have that author moniker, then I'm going to launch a new series on top of that. Well, that's fine. In the same way, some people are like, Dan, should I hire a publicist? And I go into what publicists do. And some people, if they get on a Channel 5 News for an interview, they are thrilled. I was on TV. So the publicity fee was worth it. Other people, if you say, well, I got on Channel 5 News, it moved another 4 additional books, they think it's not worth it. So it does come into what you want out of it as well. But that's a big one. I'm always worried about people who are going to spend a while developing a thing and then without kind of thinking about how that thing will launch or the experience. Like courses are always the good example for me, because I've seen so many people like, I'm just going to develop a course from that. And I'm like, wait, let's talk about this. Like, what do you think is going to happen when the course launches? I'm just going to develop it and we'll see what happens. And I'm like, wait, because I've seen so many people and I've done it myself. You launch a course, you're so excited, it's all fancy, but then it doesn't land anywhere. And then you got to think, oh gosh, now what do? I just spent 9 months where I didn't do anything else other than develop the course. And you've got a marketing problem in your hands. And now it's an existential crisis because you've spent so much time and resources developing it.
Boy, that's the truth. Tim, does that help?
It does. I've already been on TV and interviewed, so that means nothing to me. I'm just looking for income streams that are low-hanging fruit. There are something that I've been thinking about for a while that wouldn't take too much trouble. For an ebook, I have InDesign and I've accomplished with it, so that is not a barrier really. But yeah, I don't want to put work into something that isn't going to come back to me reasonably. And although I usually sell courses before I create them, I have, like you said, Dan, I had one that was, this is surefire. Everybody's been telling me they want this. Total splat.
Been there.
One quick follow-up. What are your thoughts on Kindle versus simply self-selling ebook?
I mean, it's always hard to ignore Amazon and Kindle and just the marketplace they've created. It's the same way it's now become possible to ignore Spotify when it comes to podcasts. So I just think of it that way of, does it give you access to a marketplace more than anything else? And then what kind of book do you want to be creating? So that's usually how I'll think about that.
All right. I just bought your book, so thanks.
Oh, thank you.
Well, that's an interesting thing. Do you find how does somebody do the math on that? Because, so for example, I got PDFs, I sell them for $40 usually on my website. And, but if I sold on Kindle, I probably wouldn't be selling it for $40. I don't know what it would be, but it'd be lower than that. How do you figure out the math on that, and what's going to be better? Are there certain metrics you look at of how big is your following, or, how does one decide what would make one more money?
Yeah, I don't look at it from a metric standpoint like that. I don't have the math, but it's the idea of, if you're selling a $40 ebook, you have a high trust factor going on where you've met this person in a way where, you're just so great on video and all the stuff that you do. And it's like, so if someone's come into your orbit and they've seen you, whether it's in a social channel or in a workshop, there's a real high trust value there. Right. And it's not hard for you to position $40 as being really high value, very generous because you're doing it in that way. Whereas on the Amazon page for my book, I don't get to do that in the same way. I get the same little text everyone else gets, and they see the price that's higher than all the other marketing books in that kind of era. So there's not a lot of trust there. Even if I have a lot of reviews saying it's totally worth paying twice as much for Dan's book, it's not the same because people are used to spending less money on that. It's the same way that you'll go to some places and spend $100 on a great vegan meal, and other places where you're spending not more than $6.99. And it's like there's the atmosphere around it that creates the exotic, exquisite, expensive environment for it.
Yeah. Well, and it just had me think, probably in my situation, one day I'll write the Marketing for Hippies book, the kind of 101 level intro book, because all my other books are fairly niched on specific topics. And that one would probably be on Kindle. I think, that's the one I'd put out.
That's what I was thinking too, is there that like the basic foundational thing that would be $9.99, and then there's the advanced stuff, and then you go really up, way up from even $40.
Right. $2 million. Okay, Russell said, what do you think of these self-publishing firms like Balboa Press that have expensive book packages, or would you recommend print on demand?
It's a really good question. In a way, obviously, every part of the market serves a need. And I've had so many clients who've done that because they want to trust that there are book designers and book packagers and people, and they'll have different packages. Sometimes you get a sales team or you get publicists, where they want to just know that they don't have to worry about it. And then there are other people who are going to look at the math and say, I can figure this out, or I can kind of subcontract this out myself. Why am I paying you as a general contractor this huge fee to hire the same electrician I would hire, but you're getting a cut on top of that? Now the electrician's not $200 an hour, now they're $400 an hour. Why would I do that? So I think that people want that. They want something turnkey. They want a high level of trust. They want comfort with that. And they want it to be done. They want to, like, I click the button, I bought that package. I have a schedule. I'm in someone's hands. I'm getting the standard thing, which is not how I'm built. I'm built in the, like, I'm going to be, like every little thing I'm going to be in the back end because I want to know it's done right. Like we had plumbers over last week. I'm hovering over those plumbers. But also in the same way, it's like they cut a hose too short. It was actually making the water flow too tight. And they were kind of like, they were going to kind of leave it because it would have gotten the job done. And I'm like, seems to be a little slow. And they're like, yeah, I think it's the hose. I'm like, can we get a new one in there? Yeah. I'll go out to the truck and get a new one. But that's how I am up here. Like I have to do that. And most people aren't that way. They don't want that level of involvement. So I think that some of them are really good and have great, a great process behind them, and they're good value. Obviously, there's some in any industry which are like, but it just depends on how you want to work and what you're going to be happy with too.
Yeah. Okay. So a question two people asked was basically the pros and cons, self-publishing versus going with a publisher.
So this comes down to a lot of different things. In one way, it comes down to control, because with a publisher now you have to first get a literary agent. Then that literary agent has to try to get you a publisher. Then when you get a publisher, which is great, which is amazing, now you're on a schedule. We're gonna talk about the fall of 2022 or spring of 2023, and you're kind of in that pipeline, and that could be fine for you. They're going to start talking with you about marketing when they're ready to talk to you about marketing, because they've got other books they're putting out from then. They're going to do a certain amount of effort with everything, not because they're bad people, they're wonderful people, but because they're doing so many books and they're not there to hold your hand with every aspect of it. And you're obviously signing away certain amounts of rights, a certain financial cut, all of that. So there's benefits if, again, you want something turnkey. You want the validation, which nothing negative there. You want that validation. That's a real thing. Or if you don't want to worry about all those decisions, you just want to know my publisher is figuring that out. My editor is working with me on that. Again, for me, it's like I'm working on a new book. I'm not even considering a traditional publisher. Because if I would view that route if I had the platform where I knew this is going to go to Crown, and when Crown puts out a book, it's going to really launch me to another echelon. But I've got to earn that from them, and I don't think I'm there yet. I mean, I know editors there. Like, I know I'm not there yet. And for me, it's like, I'd rather self-publish this. I want to own it fully because that kind of matters to me. Like, I want to own the IP. I can do it on my schedule. I can attach it to all my stuff. I'm not worried about them. I've talked to so many writers who like hate the book cover they've been given, or they're fighting with the book cover, or they came with one editor and the editor leaves for another company and now they're orphaned, is the term they use. Now another editor picked it up, but that editor doesn't love the books. You're getting attention, you're getting everything, but you don't feel that same connection. So it depends on the kind of experience you want. And I don't love vying for an agent and then vying for a publisher. And like, it's a lot of asking permission. And I just feel like I'm at a point in my life where I don't have that kind of patience.
Amen. Yeah, I do get it though. There are different moments and different things where it may be, okay, this is the book I'll take to a publisher because I want the status and the cachet that's going to come from that publisher, because I want to be seen in bookstores. There's this, I remember Lynn Twist, a woman, she wrote a book called The Soul of Money, and I heard anyway, she hustled real hard, campaigned really hard to get the Nautilus Prize, some book prize, some kind. Anyway, she won, and which really helped, because then she could say Lynn Twist, winner of the Nautilus Prize, and all of this. So yeah, there's different points in our career, I suppose, where a certain approach, self-publishing better here, getting a publisher better here, Kindle better here, and it's just good to know, right, what do you want from it? What are you hoping it'll do? Yeah, if I did a Kindle book, with the Marketing for Hippies, I could fully see going to a publisher with that one. It's just like, yeah, do your thing, and we'll make it a Kindle, and we'll get it as big as we can. I'll do all the podcasts you want me to do, and I'll hustle, and I'll, it may be for those reasons. Whereas the other books would, it's the same thing I do with my workshops, live workshops on a pay what you can basis. But I tell people, it's like, you don't have to do pay what you can with it for everything. People make a dogma of it. Oh, this is the one true way. I sell ebooks flat fee. I do one-on-one flat fee, and other people do the ebooks pay what you can, and the workshops are paid, Yeah. Okay, one last question here. This is an interesting one. This gets into like the gossip in the industry. So Russell Scott, who has published a book called Awaken the Guru in You, he says, I've been approached by many self-publishing firms that say they've heard about my book and say that their book evaluators have read my book and say it is a 9 out of 10. And then they say they will publish it cheaper and they will display it at international book expos, or send me 5,000 copies, or send 5,000 copies of books to maybe bookstores across the nation to create it as a bestseller. And it will cost me $5,000. Have you come across these publishers? Sounds like a scam to me. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, every red flag in my brain goes up with that, because it just sounds like it's a pitch where, I was invited onto a podcast the other day, and I click through the page, and they're just like, we will promote your podcast on our email list to 20,000 people, and we are going to send it out to our whatever, and they're going on, and I'm like, wow, they're like really pitching me hard just to be a free guest on a podcast, which is normally an easy yes for me. And you realize there's like a VIP buy-up, which I thought was genius, by the way. But it was like also like it was a no for me, like just even go near it, because it's like, even as I hear that, it's not just that there's a tone, but I'm like, what is the value? You're an international seller. It's like, well, what's that? You're sending out these copies to bookstores. Well, bookstores can return them. What bookstores are getting this? Do they want the book? Like, everything that was part of their pitch is that red flag of like, well, let me look at that one thing and let me really unpack that and think, what is the value here? And how are they doing that? How can they offer that to me and probably 20 other authors at scale? So what's really going on here? If you're saying, we'll blast it to our email list of 400,000 people, how do you get a list that big? Let me get on your email list. What emails are you sending out? How often? Where am I in that placement? Like, every red flag goes up, not that it's inherently bad, but like, I'm going to dissect this within an inch of its life to figure out how do they offer that? Because that is unusual. You get an offer from Penguin Random House. They're not saying any of that to you. So why is this firm doing that? What's their business model, which is not a bad thing. Let me reverse engineer the business model so I know if we can be a good partner or not.
Amen. And Russell, the other thing I'd say is just ask them, oh, hey, this sounds great. I'd love to talk to 5 of your authors you've done this with, and just see what happened. Are these real people? Did it actually work? Did they achieve the results? I mean, let's see some real life case studies, because maybe they have a business model where it's like, look, this sounds too good to be true. We get it, but here's the way we do it. We've mapped out the bookstores. We know which bookstores like which books. We've got a great relationship with them independently. I mean, maybe they've got something.
It's true.
But when it sounds too good to be true, it often is. And Dan, it's one of the things I love about you. You don't sound too good to be true. You sound, there's some things, it's like Goldilocks. It's like, oh, too lame and way too hyped up. And I just found you have threaded the needle of just right in terms of your tone, which is why I mention you at a lot of my workshops. Anytime people say, oh, I'm an author and I need help, I'm just like, you've got to talk to
Plenty
Dan.
of people come to me mentioning you, so I very much appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And all of you, I hope, number one, if you're thinking about writing a book, you might reach out to Dan. But also, if you have friends or colleagues who are writing books, please, I mean, today, you can send them a little note like, hey, I know you're working on a book. I just heard this interview. I'll be putting this up on YouTube, of course, so feel free to share it, everyone, when you see it. So this will be just something you can pass on to them to check it out. Yeah, there are a lot of scams out there. There are a lot of flash in the pan, kind of, this is the shiny tactic that's going to do it this year. And it really just takes time. And there's a commitment to this deeper work ongoingly over time. So Dan, thank you so much for your time. Deeply grateful for you taking an hour out of your days. And I know others do as well. So if you have any particular things you appreciate, feel free to put it in the comments. We're seeing a lot of thank you. Yeah, Dan, hopefully we'll see you down the road, and I'll share this up on YouTube, and I'll send you the link when it's out.
Thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate it.
All right, take care. Thanks, Dan.
Bye.